Hello, welcome to Strictly Money at the News Forum, where all voices matter. I'm Saijal Patel. A plan to grow our economy and make life more affordable. That was the title of the 2022 federal budget unveiled on September 7th. Tens of billions in new spending have been earmarked for targeted initiatives over the next 5 years, as well as a controversial surtax to help cut the deficit. To help us break down the impact of the budget on the Canadian economy and people's pocketbooks is David-Alexandre Brassard. He's the chief economist at CPA Canada. Hi, David. Great to have you on.
Hello, Saijal. Great. Thanks for having me.
David, some have described this budget as a modest or a prudent one. How would you characterize it? Did it meet or surpass your expectations, or did it miss the mark?
I see it as a balancing act because the starting point is the government finds itself with 100 billion additional revenues on a 5-year time frame, and they decided to spend half of it. So we're seeing incremental touches on innovation and growth, and the big ticket item, as you said, we're tackling housing quite heavily. We're going on climate change, and also with the Ukraine situation, we're going on the defense. So they try to balancing it. Will they hit the mark? That's a good question that you're asking.
Yeah. So let's go through some of those big ticket items, David. Housing affordability on a lot of people's mind. It looks like they've earmarked about $10 billion. They introduced a ban on foreign homeowners for 2 years. Mind you, with a list of exceptions, they announced this $4 billion acceleration fund to support supply. In your view, will any of these announcements or measures work?
I'm quite happy to see that most of the money was directed for housing supply, which has been targeted as the issue. So those ones might hit the mark. The fact that the federal government's taking a leadership position on housing is quite interesting. When we talk about the other side of the coin, supporting homeownership, I'm just wondering if the support to first-time homebuyer will put more pressure on the market. That's a concern that I have. And you mentioned the ban on foreign ownership, and for example, the tax on property flipping. Those to me are small increments that I don't believe will necessarily change the balance that much.
Okay. Environment. $12.4 billion of new spending to get to this net zero by 2050. Were you satisfied with their plan in their transition to the greener economy? I mean, did they get that balance right between being able to meet that forecast and making sure that they don't hurt our economy?
Well, the first thing we need to talk about it in that point is that the budget comes right after they table the 2030 reduction plan. So it goes hand in hand on that front. A lot of the money is directed towards the transition to electric vehicles, which is a big ticket item on their agenda. And I'm happy to see that we're doubling down on the investing side. So we want to invest for carbon capture, and that's a good thing. We'll still have to wait and see because the carbon pricing, how it's going to increase in the further year is quite high. So consumers might still feel it in their pockets.
Okay. One of the things that did surprise me, David, was that there wasn't a lot of mention about COVID and supporting businesses necessarily who've been really hard hit, right? We know that many of them are reeling in debt, and sort of addressing that legacy of debt seem to have missed or been missed. What are your thoughts?
As I told you, it's the balancing act for the Liberals relies on the fact that they've been hit by commentators and other political parties about the fact that they spent too much on COVID-19 support. So I think they're trying to move away from that. And will some people be left behind in the hard hit sectors? Maybe. That's kind of the risk that they're judging is okay in terms of balancing the good and the bad.
Okay. We only have about 30 seconds. The deficit reduction and the timing of it, do you think it's pretty realistic?
I'm kind of a bit not sad, but I would have hoped to see something around the lines of balancing the budget. But like you said, it's in red ink on the forecast period. So I'm hoping that we'll see better. We'll go back to a balanced budget eventually.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. David, one of the ways that we know that government is going to pay for all this spending is taxes. And the one that's raised a lot of eyebrows is the surtax on banks. Now, we know that the impact on the bottom line for the banks and the insurers won't be really severe. But it seems like the real issue is that they're targeting certain industries. Do you think that sets a bad precedent? And what do you think the ramifications are?
Yeah, I think we have to be very careful when we're targeting certain industries or businesses through the tax system. I usually would prefer a broader approach, meaning taxing the businesses in general and not targeting. The questions that I have in that case is that tax simply going to be transferred to the consumers? Because let's be honest, financial institutions are big companies. So they probably have the power to transfer it to consumers. So that's a concern as well.
Yeah. I think what's also interesting is, you look at the cost versus the $6 billion or so that they're probably going to get in revenue. And I'm wondering if the cost is the signal that we're sending to foreign investors that, when businesses are successful, we penalize them, right? Because let's face it, when competition it is tough and money goes where they know they're going to get a return. And if they're not going to get that, they go somewhere else. Do you feel that same way, or am I reading it differently?
No, you touch on an important point, which is our competitiveness. Of course, we're fighting for international money. So you're right in saying that if we set a precedent in targeting certain industries that are profitable, we're not necessarily sending the right signal. That's what I could say on the matter.
Yeah. David, did you see a growth agenda? I mean, speaking on that point, right? We can't tax our way to growth. That we know that doesn't work. Did you see a growth agenda in this budget?
I saw some foundations. What I mean by that is we put some money on innovation and growth. But we're still trying to up our capacities in terms of what the government can do. So it invested in itself a bit more. I'm hoping that we're going to see a bit more bold agenda and a bit more money in investing directly. Because it's good to have the capacity to evaluate and support innovation, but you need some money to leverage private investment and also de-risk long-term innovation, which is kind of the lagging part that we have is the longer term innovation and how we can de-risk it. That's kind of my view on that.
Yeah, and so let's talk about that. So $5.5 billion, it looks like earmarked for innovation. They have $1 billion on a new investment agency. What I thought was really interesting, $3.8 billion on critical minerals development. We are resource rich, so to have this to sell around the world. What's your take on their innovation strategy and what they're doing?
I think that I want to say this well. I'm not convinced that we know exactly where to go. So we're still building up that agenda, like I said, and bold innovation is sort of hard to support. So yeah, we do, once again, we'll rely on improving our capacity. I'm also a bit, I have some questions around supporting innovation outside of climate change, because you have to innovate in climate change, but you also have to do it outside of it. And the new Canadian fund is gonna rely mostly on climate change innovation.
All right. Inflation also, David, on a lot of people's minds, the cost of living. Do you get a sense that the government is taking it seriously, and are they relying on fiscal policy, or now are they more sort of shifting that to monetary policy and letting the Bank of Canada handle that?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. In terms of inflation support, some people were probably expecting more. There's a direct payments for housing costs, $500 for some households. They've been shy on the details on that front. But as you said, they're hoping that the economy grows enough to give us the supply that we need, because the current inflation is more related to a lack of supply than overheating demand. But I'm not it's a bit of a let's pray that the economy grows fast enough, and that the interest rates increases lead us out of that inflationary period.
Let's hope, right? Fingers crossed. Thanks so much for your time today, David.
Thank you for having me, Saijal, once again.
David-Alexandre Brassard of CPA Canada. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Strictly Money. We continue our analysis of the recently unveiled federal budget, but this time with a focus on seniors. After all, seniors have been the hardest hit by the COVID pandemic. And with the rising cost of goods and little ability to compensate for that through higher income, their financial vulnerability is a growing concern for many, including my next guest. Laura Tamblyn Watts is CEO of CanAge, and she joins me now. Laura, great to have you back.
Good morning.
Laura, accessibility was a big priority for you when you were looking at this budget. Can you explain what you mean by that? And did the government deliver?
It did some things, but it didn't certainly go as far as it could. One of the big pieces that people were looking for is support to age in place. We've certainly been talking about long-term care and the many challenges that we've had over COVID-19, but they're, of course, exacerbated for more than what happened prior, which is, of course, overcrowding and long wait lists. So people are looking for some help from government, and they got some. So they have increased some tax benefits that allow people to age in place, $20,000 now. That's a doubling of accessibility tax credits. So that means if you need to put a ramp in or adjust your house in some way, you got some extra money to do that. You will also have some additional money, $7,500 if you're living in a multi-generational house, to help include accessibility proportions to age in place. So a little bit here, not really enough to go all the way though.
Yeah, I was really shocked to read, Laura, that more than 400,000 Canadians have unmet home care needs. So they're relying heavily on hospitals. Where do we improve from this?
We are having such a backlog when it comes to things like home care. Right now in Ontario alone, about 6,000 people don't just have unmet needs, they can't get into home care at all. And what this means is being downloaded onto families, or you end up in some type of crisis situation. This is not what we want. This government did not really address this except for the lightest amount. They said they're going to appoint a panel to study how we can do better on aging at home. Now, this goes on top of its throne speech, which did commit to creating some additional funding to help with supports on home care. It's a bit nebulous, however, in this budget.
Yeah, what would you have liked to have seen?
We need a national strategy that looks at aging in place.
Yeah.
And we don't even have a national strategy on aging, let alone one on aging in place. And this is one of the biggest mega trends across the country. And it seems like we're winging it province to province.
Yeah. Speaking of provinces, how do you think the provinces are faring in supporting seniors? Because I guess, healthcare does kind of fall under their jurisdiction. Are you seeing some headway there?
Bits and pieces only. What we're seeing, depending on which province you're in, is whether it's longer term thinking or politically motivated. Certainly in Ontario, we've got an election coming up. So there are all kinds of goodies that are folding out. But we have seen rushed legislation in Ontario. In BC, we're starting to see a bit more of thinking around seniors, but nothing really in their budget. Newfoundland just released their budget, and they've done a better job thinking about rural seniors. Again, what we're seeing is a patchwork approach and not really any kind of concrete thinking. And we need the federal government for leadership on that.
Yeah. Nova Scotia, I thought I saw something on their budget that recently that seemed to have targeted supporting seniors.
Nova Scotia and Manitoba have both really focused on it, and that's got some leadership in government around seniors issues. We have Barbara Adams, who used to work with seniors and is a physiotherapist, and she's now the Minister for Seniors and Long-Term Care. Unsurprisingly, we're starting to see some really good things out of Nova Scotia as her thinking is being embedded. What Manitoba just did is really interesting as well. They're starting to think about how personal care homes are connecting to the community. And actually, a real surprise, just last week, Alberta created brand new legislation, and its legislation is going to actually have one piece of governance that does everything from home care to long-term care. And that is revolutionary, because right now we often have 3 to 6 pieces of legislation. It's a real mishmash. So Alberta is streamlining it with its legislation, and that's really good news.
Oh, that's great. We only have about 20 seconds to the break. One thing that seniors are telling you that they're concerned about.
Affordability, with the cost of living going up, inflation rising, and they don't have much money to begin with. Often they're trying to make it stretch farther, and that's a dim view for the next 5 years for them.
And they can't exactly make it up by going back to work when they're well into their retirement, right? All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Laura, in the budget, I know you were looking for an update on the national housing strategy and what support that provided for seniors. What were you looking for exactly?
We were really looking for a revision to the national housing strategy and significant investment on that connection between housing and care. And we didn't really get it. So there is very much a focus on housing in this budget. It does talk about other forms of housing. So co-ops are back. We haven't really seen those since the 70s, 80s, and even the early 90s. And that's good news, because they're an innovative form of housing. We're talking more about building housing, and we do need that. We have very little housing in the market right now, but not a lot of thinking about how we're going to age in place in ways that seniors can get care into their homes. So a bit of a miss on that. We're hopeful, however, that this comment about the expert panel may lead more to that in future.
Yeah. Interesting you talked about building housing, because one of my biggest beefs, I'll tell you, is that we build up, right? And I'm talking because where I happen to be in Toronto or the GTA, but everything's sort of 3-story or 2-story. And that's just not very conducive to seniors who want to stay in place. And are you having discussions around sort of building codes and how we actually build 1-story, bungalow homes?
We are seeing such an interest in the market to try to buy those old homes from the 30s and 40s that were really 1-story bungalows without stairs. They're
even more
priced out of market.
Yeah.
They're priced out of market. In fact, everything is kind of priced out of market right now. So we are seeing a real challenge with building codes. We certainly know the National Home Builders Association is part of this conversation, but until we actually widen doorways, make stairs a thing of the past where they don't need to be there, and actually put in so many of those universal accessibility design functions that we know how to do, but right now we're not required to do it, and they're a bit more expensive. And so, frankly, until we're required to do it, they won't.
Okay. The other thing that came up in the budget was this legal amendment to the Bank Act and Financial Consumer Agency of Canada to support seniors who launch complaints. Can you talk about that and the significance, and is it significant?
It is significant, and it's code words there. But what it means is, for the average consumer, that if you can't resolve a dispute with your bank right now, you have to go between OBSI, which is the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments, they're the nonprofit independent version, and frankly, a for-purchase arbitration chamber that so many of the financial institutions have been using, which is not transparent. And I can tell you their outcomes are not good for consumers. So finally, after about 15 years, the government has stepped in and said no more, that consumers should be able to go to reliable, independent organizations. So this is really much crisper and cleaner, good news for consumers.
So on that then, are seniors concerned about the way they're having to deal with banks? What are their concerns?
They mostly don't know how to have a complaint. It's really hard to do that. And so many challenges, and we've certainly seen scandals about upselling to seniors or people who are being sold things that are completely inappropriate in terms of their financial products. For that matter, banking and investments are a big concern. And we're, of course, seeing an increase in frauds and scams and all kinds of transactions where banks are there. So this is a one-stop shop that they can rely on now.
Okay. We have about a minute left. You're advocating for a lot of changes, Laura. I commend you for it. What's your priority? What's your biggest priority in the coming weeks and months? What are you going to focus on?
We want to have a seniors care transfer. Right now, provinces are quite rightfully saying to the federal government, we need more money in healthcare transfers. They got some of that, not as much as they want, but they did get an increase in healthcare transfers. But the problem is all that money goes to, health broadly, hospitals and acute care. What we need to do is some planning to help with transportation, housing, home care, long-term care, and that's got to go in its own pocket with some strings attached. So that's what we'd like to see from the federal government to the provinces.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on and your insights.
Thank you.
That was Laura Tamblyn Watts, CEO of CanAge. Well, that wraps up this edition of Strictly Money. If you have thoughts or questions about the budget, if there's something that you felt was missed on the budget, whether that's related to the innovation or environment or seniors, please drop us an email. We would love to hear from you. Until next time, stay well, stay wise, and stay wealthy.